hope you can all hear me now. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Ruth Cook and our Gen XYZ friends. By the way, XYZ stands for Extra Years of Zest, which I hope you all have. I first met Ruth Cook several years ago when she spoke to UAB New Horizons about a compelling book she had written titled Behind the Barbed Wire. Chronicling a lesser-known aspect of World War II, Ruth recreated the world of Aliceville, Alabama, where as many as 6,000 German prisoners of war and 1,000 military police guards set up camp and stayed for nearly 3 years. Guest Behind the Barbed Wire was awarded a bronze medal for outstanding historical writing by the Independent Publishers Group in 2008. 2 other books of narrative nonfiction history she has written include Across the River, about the forced exodus of locals by General Sherman during the Civil War, and her 3rd book, Magic and Stone, the subject of today's talk, on the marvel of white crystalline marble and its significance to Sylacauga. Ruth Beaumont Cook hails from Bedford, Ohio, and is a graduate of Ohio State University. She has lived in the Birmingham area since 1970, where Ruth pursued her love of writing and developed an intimate knowledge of Alabama. Her blog, Road Trips, highlights off-the-beaten-path adventures around the state. Ruth is also the author of numerous articles on history, business, and the arts for Birmingham Magazine, Alabama Heritage, and other regional and national publications. She has also served on the boards of the Writing Today Conference at Birmingham Southern and the Alabama Writers Forum. Ruth's current projects include writing a collection of short stories, as well as a video interviewing sculptors who are involved in the Marble Festival in Sylacauga. And now let's hear from this very talented author, Ruth Beaumont Cook.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. Can all of you hear me? Okay, good. I'm going to split this screen so you don't have to look totally at me. I hope I've got this done right. There we go. Can all of you see the pictures that are on the screen now? Okay. Magic and Stone, as Dorothy said, is the story of the marble in Sylacauga, Alabama. And I particularly like these 2 photographs that are on this first slide. On the left, what you see is the original Gant's Quarry, which is now, this particular part of it at least, is now dormant. But there is an overlook. If you go down Highway 280 and turn right instead of left towards Sylacauga at the Fort Williams Road, you will come across the overlook for that. And there's some historical writing there. The piece on the right is a sculpture called The Heart of Sylacauga, for obvious reasons. But I think it's also very symbolic of the sculpture of marble, because you see the rough cut piece that's taken out of the quarry. And then you see the beautiful image that Dale Liner, the sculptor, saw in that chunk of marble, and then was able to sculpt and polish and smooth into that beautiful heart. So it's kind of a theme in a way. Make sure I've got the right buttons here to get up and down with. Hold on. There we go. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how the Marble Festival came about in Sylacauga. They now have a festival every year, first week or so of April, where they bring sculptors from all over the country. They usually bring at least one master sculptor from Italy. And these people set up tents in Bluebell Park and they sculpt for 10 days. You can go and watch them doing their work. You can visit programs at the Comer Library in Sylacauga and learn more about the marble. But the way this came about In the year 2008, the Alabama State Council on the Arts decided to create a kind of a sister relationship between the entire state of Alabama and the city of Pietrasanta in Italy. If you know Italy, Pietrasanta is a city on the western coast that is like literally next door to the Carrera marble quarries. And I like to say about those that when Michelangelo had a new commission, that's where he went shopping for his marbles. So it's a very well-known place. So they set up this sister exchange between Pietrasanta and the state of Alabama. And it wasn't just about marble. They sent artworks. The first year, they sent art from all different facets of Alabama, including, for example, an Italian translation of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, G's Ben quilts, paintings by Knoll, poetry by Jeannie Thompson. They just sent all kinds of art to Italy. And the mayor of Sylacauga at that time, Mr. Wright, and his wife went along because of the marble in Sylacauga. So that was the first year, and it was very, very successful. And the agreement was that the following year, in 2009, Italy, Pietrasanta rather, would send their artists to share with the people of the state of Alabama. They sent an entire opera company, they sent a dance troupe, they sent painters, and they sent two highly talented sculptors, among others. So when Mayor Wright came back in 2008, he decided that there was an even tighter connection between Pietrasanta and just Sylacauga because of the marble. And so he decided to establish that very first marble festival in the spring of 2009. And this is where I came in because they asked me to write the brochure that you see on the right there. They wanted a brief history of the marble in Sylacauga. And so I agreed to do that. And we put together that brochure, and it was available for that very first marble festival, which was so successful in 2009 that they decided to have it every year. And they celebrated, fortunately, their 10-year anniversary before they had to shut down because of the pandemic. So that's how I got involved. After that brochure came out, they decided that they would very much like to have a longer work, a full book of the history of the marble, which I found to be a really fascinating and enjoyable project to work on, because it's a story of the art. It's also a story of the company town of Gant's Quarry, where a lot of people who still have great memories grew up out there. It's just a very interesting tale, which I'm going to share as much as I can with you today. If you would like to know more about it, this is a copy of the cover of the book, and I've listed a couple places where you can get it. You can also order it from my email address, which I think Dorothy has, right? Yeah, yes. Dorothy has it. And I will be happy to deliver autographed copies to the temple for you if you would like to do that. So my interest in marble did not just begin in 2008. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, which has a fabulous art museum, and had taken art classes there when I was in elementary school. So I saw a lot of sculpture growing up. And then when I went to college, first at Ohio Wesleyan University, my roommate was a fine arts major, and she was from New Jersey. So after the summer after our freshman year was the occasion of the New York World's Fair, which was held in Queens that year. And Italy sent as their contribution to that fair Michelangelo's Pieta, which is one of the most incredible sculptures in the world. And you can see the detail of it there on the right, how that's one piece of marble basically carved into that beautiful sculpture. What you see on the left is the way it was displayed at the World's Fair in New York. And the only way you could see it was to get on this horizontal escalator. and it would move slowly by, and it was about the same distance that you see in this photograph. So it was beautifully done with the blue and the light and everything, but you couldn't grasp it in that drive-by, so to speak. So I remember that my roommate and I would get off at the other end of the escalator, and then we'd run around and get back at the back of the line. And I think we did that about 5 or 6 times so that we could actually see every detail that we wanted to of that. So I did have, some background interest in the marble and the sculpture. And then there was a really, how in life sometimes things just juxtapose in odd ways and you say, oh, that just can't happen. Well, the week that I went down to Sylacauga to talk to them about writing that first brochure, I came back with the information I needed, and my husband and I sat down, as we often did, to watch a classic movie on American Movie Channel. And the one we happened to watch that night, you see 2 clips from it here on the left. You may recognize, as I talk about this, what movie it was. But that's Patricia Neal on the left, playing the part of Dominique Francone, I think was her last name. And the person on the right is Gary Cooper playing Howard Rourke. So I'm watching this movie with my husband, and I just spent the afternoon talking about Alabama and Sylacauga and marble. And Dominique is up in her bedroom. Her father owns a granite quarry, and she looks out the window and she sees this handsome, rugged man down there working in the quarry, and decides nothing will do, but she has to meet him. So she walks across her bedroom, and there is a beautiful, beautiful marble fireplace in that room. And she picks up a poker and smashes one corner of it. And then she calls her servant and says, you see that man down there in the quarry? Go get him and tell him to come up here. I want him to fix my fireplace. So I'm sitting there watching this, and she's standing there, and Gary Cooper comes striding into her bedroom, and she explains that he needs to fix the fireplace, and he walks over and stoops down, picks up a chunk of marble, and he says what you see on the screen there. This is Alabama marble, very high grade, very expensive. And I said to my husband, I said, that's that stuff I'm going to be writing about. And it was just one of those odd, connections. But yes, that line is actually in that movie. So a little bit of a history lesson from here. This is a geological sketch of the Sylacauga marble. You can see that when it was forced up by earthquakes or whatever to the surface, it came up at a slant between 2 slices, so to speak, of dolomite. It is a very, very high quality crystalline marble between Cahatchee and Talladega Rebecca Mountains in Talladega County. And it is an unbelievably large vein. It's 32 miles long. It's about 1.5 miles wide right by Sylacauga, and it's about 400 feet deep. And when I talked to some of the people out of one of the companies that quarries now a few years ago, and I said something about, well, what are you going to do with this property when you've mined all the marble? And he grinned and he said, there's enough here for another good 250 years. So it's a huge vein of marble. Now, the marble in Sylacauga has been compared to high quality marble in only 2 other places in the world that have that same crystalline structure. One of those places is the island of Paros off the coast of Greece. And the most famous piece that was sculpted from there was sculpted about the 3rd century BC. You see it on the right, you might recognize that. It's known as either the Winged Victory of Samothrace or Nike of Samothrace. And it is of the same quality of marble that you find right here in Sylacauga. And I thought it was interesting, someone pointed out to me while I was working on this, that Julia Tutwiler knew about the quality of that marble as early as 1868 when she wrote her song Alabama, because the second verse, which not everybody sees, but the second verse says, from the quarries where the marble white as that of Paros gleams. So it was known that far back that it had that high quality. The other place, of course, that it's compared to is Carrera in Italy. And you can see another piece by Michelangelo there on the right. Now, the difference between Sylacauga marble and Carrera marble, they're very similar in structure, but in Sylacauga, the marble is down about 300 feet below the normal surface. In Carrera, the marble has thrust up into a mountain area. So in Carrera, you go into the side of the mountain to quarry it. In Sylacauga, you have to go down about 300 feet to get to it. But as I said, geologically, they're very similar. Now, people often ask me, well, how did it get discovered? And as far as we know, back in the late 1700s, the Piqua tribe of Shawnee Indians, Native Americans, came down to Alabama and settled along the river there in the Sylacauga area. And they were the ones who first noticed this marble kind of cropping, pieces of it at least, cropping up to the surface. They used it for arrowheads. And you can see that the evolution of the name of the town. Sylacauga was the name of the Shawnee settlement there on the river. And then over time it became Sylacauga, and then Sylacauga, and then the Sylacauga that we know it as today. Now, a little bit more of a history lesson. Let's see, I have to back up here. Andrew Jackson brought troops in from Tennessee to fight the Creek Confederacy in 1814 in northern Alabama. And there was a man with him, it was his Surgeon General, whose name was Edward Gant. He was a doctor who served with Jackson's troops. And after the Creek Confederacy was defeated, he went back to Tennessee for a while. And then later he settled in Selma, Alabama, and had a medical practice there. In 1832, the Creek Confederacy, although they'd been defeated, they were still in the state, and they signed what was called the Treaty of Cassetta, which transferred vast amounts of land from their holdings to American settlers in Alabama. And at that time, between 1832 and 1834, settlers began to come into the Coosa River Valley, and Talladega County was established as an official county of Alabama. By 1834, they opened a land office at Martisville, which is near Talladega, and began to advertise those creek lands for sale. And Dr. Gant, although he was living in Selma, bought up a fairly large amount of property in Talladega County because he knew that there was marble there and he had an ambition to quarry it. By 1836, as you probably know from your history, the remaining creeks who were in this area were removed from Alabama, and the order was for them to move west. This is when we have the Trail of Tears that sent most of these people out to the Oklahoma area. This is a map from 1837. I don't know if can you see my little pointer on there? I don't know. You see Sylacauga here in the middle. And by that time in 1837, Dr. Gant had established the Sims, Gant and Company Quarry north of Sylacauga. And he had also established Sims and Gant Marble Quarry southwest of Sylacauga. And that is the one, if you hear reference to Gant's Quarry today, that's where this was. Edward Gant was a physician, but he became more and more involved with his quarries. He also began to design memorial stones from the marble. And this is one that is still in existence today in the Weguffka Cemetery, not too far from Sylacauga. In the pre-Civil War times in the 1800s, there were actually 3 different people who quarried the marble and used it for memorial stones, for a little bit for architecture and sculpture. The first of those I already mentioned, Edward Gant. The second one was a man named George Hurd, who came from Scotland and was so impressed with the quality of the marble that he sent for 4 or 5 of his brothers to come and work with him in the quarries. And you see his trademark that he put on all of his memorial stones up here in the upper left. It's kind of a glorified H for his Hurd name. And this is a stone that is in a cemetery in Greene County. His brother had a marble finishing business down there, and George would send the marble down. Now, the third man was a man that everybody called Alphabet Nix. His actual name was Joseph Nix, but they called him Alphabet because his name, I've got to look at it here, his full name was Joseph Madison Napoleon Bonaparte Nix. So it was much easier to just call him Alphabet. But he also quarried the marble, and he had a finishing shop in Montgomery for many years. In Pine Hill Cemetery in Auburn, which is right off the campus area, you can find 2 stones, one done by Edward Gant and one done by George Hurd, still standing there right next to each other. And they're beautiful marble pieces. Now, whenever you research a historical topic to write about it, people will tell you stories. They'll say, oh, did you know this? Or, oh, did you know that about that topic? And one of the things that people told me when I was first working on this was, oh, did I know that the Washington Monument was made out of Alabama marble? Well, no, not exactly. It was actually made out of marble from Maryland and Massachusetts, the monument itself. But what a lot of people don't know is that while they were constructing that, the group in Washington, D.C. sent out an invitation all over the United States and Europe, inviting states, cities, various historical organizations, groups like the Masons and they didn't have Rotary then, but those types of groups, to send stones representing their state or their country or their community to be embedded into the walls, the inside walls of the Washington Monument. And if you've ever been on that spiral staircase that goes up in there, you would have seen some of these. Alabama actually has 2 of them. So we do have some marble in the Washington Monument. The bottom one over here on the left was done by a Masonic group that Edward Gant was active in. The top one was done to represent the state of Alabama. And both of these were quarried at Gant's Quarry. Both of them were lettered by Alphabet Nix in 1849 in Montgomery. And then they were sent by ox cart down to the coast and up by barge to Washington, D.C. Now, I do think that the inscription on the Alabama stone is interesting. Remember, this is 1849. It's a little more than 10 years before the war between the states. But Alabama was already asserting their states' rights image by saying a union of equality as adjusted by the Constitution. In other words, they had their impression of what that meant, a union of equality. So they were put in there in 1849. Now, from 1840, after 1849, and with the dissolution of the country, most of the businesses in the South eventually fell apart for a long period of time, including marble quarries. There was not a great deal of demand for architecture and that kind of thing. So the quarries were dormant from the early 1860s, pretty much on up almost until the 20th century. You may be familiar with the man you see sketched here. His name was Eugene A. Smith, and he was the first official geologist, state geologist of the state of Alabama. Eileen Kilgore Henderson, who is a wonderful writer, lives outside Talladega, or Tuscaloosa rather, has written a wonderful book about his work, how he traveled by mule and buggy all over the state, reporting on various kinds of rock and stone and their use in the state. But in 1875, he first visited the dormant quarries in Sylacauga, and he made a kind of a prophetic comment at the time and wrote it in his journal. He said, "We may reasonably expect someday to see this belt of marble become valuable property. At present, there's little demand for it, though some years ago, quite an extensive business was carried on by Dr. Gant, Mr. Nix, and the Messrs. Hurd and others." So he could see that the value would eventually become important again. Now, about 1878, another interesting thing I came across, this is Redfield Proctor, who at that time was a United States Senator from Vermont, who just happened to own a couple of marble quarries up in Vermont. He later became the governor of the state. But in 1878, he sent a couple of spies down here to Alabama to check out these quarries he'd heard about, because he had heard that there was high quality marble in Alabama. So they went back and reported to him that yes, there was, but it was going to be really expensive to get it out and usable. And so Senator Proctor issued a statement saying, "Alabama marble is undesirable, and the physical conditions of the quarry site are adverse to successful operation." So he didn't do anything to spread the good word about Alabama marble at that point. So that was 1878. This is a map from 1882. Both of these maps are in the archives in Montgomery, that shows where the quarries that would eventually be seriously developed in the 20th century were located. You have Gant's Quarry, which I showed you before, down here below Sylacauga. You have Hurd's Marble Quarry here. This was George Hurd and his brother's quarry. Then you had over here the Vincent Marble Company, the Players Marble Company, which were other kind of minor quarries. And up here you had Alphabet's Quarry. So these were where all of them were located. But in 1882, if they were used at all, it was to pull out chunks and grind them up into powder for flux in steel furnaces. They weren't being used for sculpture or for memorials or anything at that point. Nothing else happens until the early 1900s. And then as industry and art and everything else began to reflourish in the South, there was renewed interest in the quarries. A man named Gutzon Borglum did a really beautiful marble bust of Abraham Lincoln in 1908, and that is done from Gant's Quarry marble. You may recognize that name. I know you're all muted, so I can't ask the question, but you probably would recognize the name Gutzon Borglum, because about 20 years later is when he created Mount Rushmore. So this is a much earlier sculpture by him. It's still on display in the Capitol Rotunda. I don't know, they move it around sometimes, but it's in the Capitol somewhere on display. So that was 1908. Now, in the early 1900s, I kind of have to branch in two different directions to tell you the history for the next few years, because there were two main companies that began to develop the marble seriously in Sylacauga in the early 1900s. The first of those was what became the Moretti-Hera Company, which one of the owners of that was a man named Giuseppe Moretti, whom you also may recognize. Giuseppe Moretti is the man who did the Vulcan sculpture that you see on top of the Red Mountain here in Birmingham. He was commissioned to do that for the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition, which was held in St. Louis, Missouri. He won a gold medal in metallurgy for that sculpture. You can see how large the exhibition hall was for that in St. Louis, because that's Vulcan right in the middle of it. And you know how tall he actually is up there on the mountain. What a lot of people don't know is that Moretti also entered a marble sculpture done in Gant's Quarry marble in that exposition, and it won a silver medal. And you see it over on the right. This is called Head of Christ. Mr. Moretti met a man in Birmingham who had a small sculpture of a book on his desk. And he asked him, he said, "Where did that marble come from? That's beautiful." And Mr. Adams said, "Oh, down there in Sylacauga, there's a couple old quarries down there." And Moretti insisted that he take him down there immediately. And they made several camping trips down there. He brought back several large pieces and used them for sculpture. And this was the first one. It was by far his most beloved piece. He kept it with him everywhere he went throughout his life. And when he died in Italy in 1935, I think it was, his wife Dorothea donated it back to the Alabama State Archives in Montgomery, and it is still on display there. It's a beautiful piece. These are other pieces that Moretti created in the Birmingham area in the early 1900s. After he created Vulcan, he decided to settle here because he was so impressed with the marble. The piece you see on the left, which he did in 1904, I really just found out about after the Magic in Stone book came out. I knew there was a bronze sculpture that Moretti had done outside of Dr. W.E.B. Davis was his name. He was a prominent gynecologist in Birmingham in the early 1900s. But Wendy Reed, who's another writer here in Alabama, called me one day, and her husband works in the Lister Hill building. And she said, "Do you know there's a marble Moretti inside that building?" Which I didn't. But Greg went and took photographs of it. This is a marble bust inside Lister Hill Library of W.E.B. Davis. In 1907, Moretti created the sculpture of Mary Cahalan. If you come out the side door of the old library building into Lynn Park downtown, you'll be looking directly at Mary. She was the very first school teacher at Powell School in Birmingham. And she died in 1906, and Moretti was commissioned to create that beautiful piece, which is still there in Lynn Park. The third one he did in that time period, in 1908, is Father Patrick O'Reilly, who was the founder of St. Vincent's Hospital and also of an orphanage in East Birmingham. The piece that you see here was out somewhere on the grounds of St. Vincent's for years. But now, if you drive up to the front of that hospital, the curved driveway that goes around in front of the front doors, you'll see Father Patrick over there on the left. He's right by the front of the hospital. So there are many, many pieces that were done early on from either Gant's Quarry marble, or now the two pieces that are downtown were done from the Blue Lake Quarry, which was closer up near Talladega. That was part of George Hurd's things. But anyway, you have those pieces around. Now, another interesting story, Mr. Moretti was an active member of the commercial club in Birmingham, which was kind of the forerunner of the Chamber of Commerce. And there was a young woman named Geneva Mercer. At the time, I think she was about 19 years old, who was from Marengo County, Alabama. And she went to school at the Alabama Normal College, as it was called then, in Livingston, Alabama. It's now the University of West Alabama. But the woman who was president of that Normal College in the early 1900s was none other than Julia Tutwiler. And Miss Tutwiler saw several small sculptures that Geneva Mercer had created and was extremely impressed with her talent. So she decided that she wanted to find a way to raise money so that Geneva could continue her studies when she graduated in Chicago at the Art Institute there. So one day, Julia Tutwiler had a little market basket, and she took 6 small red clay sculptures that Geneva Mercer had done, put them in her basket, got on the train, and went to Birmingham to go to the luncheon of the commercial club. And her intention was to talk to all these different businessmen, show them the sculptures, and solicit contributions to send Geneva Mercer to Chicago. But Giuseppe Moretti was at the luncheon that day, and he took one look at those sculptures and he said, "She doesn't need to go to Chicago. I want her to come and be my assistant, be my assistant, and I will teach her," which he proceeded to do. It was the beginning of a lifelong relationship between Giuseppe Moretti, his wife Dorothea Moretti, and Geneva Mercer. You can see the piece in the middle. This is one of her creations. It's called Joyous Boy. And the original one is bronze, and it is in the Phipps Conservatory Botanical Gardens up in Pittsburgh. There is also a copy of it at the University of West Alabama. She also did a very well-known piece that you see on the right there. This is in the Art Museum on the grounds of the Shakespeare Festival in Montgomery. It's called the Flimp Fountain. I don't know if you know what a flimp is. I didn't when I started this project, but it's a word that Geneva actually made up. It's a combination of flower and imp. And the idea behind the sculpture is that flimps are these little fairies that come out in the spring and cause all the flowers to grow. So those are two of her pieces. But as I said, she was with Giuseppe Moretti and his wife wherever they went after that summer. He taught her by having her copy well-known pieces, including, of course, his Head of Christ. And you see his sculpture there on the left. You see her plaster of Paris copy of it on the right. And that is still on display today in St. Jude's Catholic Church in Sylacauga. This is a sculpture that Moretti did early on from Gants Quarry marble. James McKnight was a member of that commercial club, and he was the one that originally invited Moretti to come to Birmingham to do Vulcan. And as a gift, Moretti gave him this sculpture of a young woman. Nobody really knows who it was, but he gave this kind of bas-relief to Mr. McKnight. And in 2011, the McKnight's grandsons donated that to the Vulcan Museum, and it's on display there now. So in 1912, Mr. Moretti had worked with a couple of other quarries, but in 1912, he founded what became the Moretti-Hera Quarry with a wealthy businessman from Philadelphia. He was only involved for a few years with that quarry himself for financial reasons, but it became one of the two extremely successful quarry companies in Gants Quarry over the next 60 years. Now, the other half of that story, I told you I had to go in two directions. The other half of that story deals with the Alabama Marble Company, which was the one that did most of the quarrying at Gants Quarry. And you can see on the left them going down to get to the marble. Those are steam derricks over on that side. Back in the 1920s, they didn't have the electricity. They used steam derricks to get it out. What you see on the right is part of the village of Gants Quarry. One of the more interesting aspects of writing this book, and I really don't have time to tell you the whole story today of the Gants Quarry village, but it was basically a company village. But it wasn't as brutal as a lot of the company villages across the country in the early 1900s. It was a very good place, according to the people I talked to who grew up there. But the company owned the houses. They built the school. They gave the land for the churches that were there. You know, it was very much a company village. These are the four men who founded the Alabama Marble Company and developed that town of Gants Quarry. On the left, you see W.P. Harrison, who was from South Carolina. He was kind of the bookkeeper guy. Up at the top on the right, you see Henry Mitchell King, who was from the Washington, D.C. area, and was kind of the overseer of the actual quarrying and finishing of the marble. Will Runge came from the Georgia Marble Company and joined Alabama Marble. And Raymond Gardner was, I think, from New Jersey. But these were the four men who developed the other main marble company in Alabama and also the village of Gants Quarry. W.P. Harrison served as the mayor of that village for 40 years. Now, as I said, there are so many different stories I could tell you, but I'm going to focus mainly on the marble today. But there's a lot more about that company village to be told. But I just want to give you an overview of some of the places it was used and what happened after the early 1900s. This is the Brown Marks building, which is recently being renovated in Birmingham. There's a lot of marble on the first 2 floors, at least, of that. That was built in 1906. This is one of those heartbreakers here in Birmingham, which I'm sure you're aware of. This was the beautiful terminal station. Unfortunately, I didn't move here until 1970, so I never got to see this other than in photographs. But the interior is heavily done in marble from Gants Quarry. You can see the floors here, some of the fretwork. One person told me that even the insides of all of the restrooms were done in Gants Quarry marble. It was built in 1909. The building on the right here is another one that it's unfortunate, I think, that the people of Alabama and many other places in the United States didn't get excited about their architectural heritage until after these 2 buildings were gone. This is the original US Post Office in Mobile. All of those archways, the sashes around the windows, and much of the inside marble was also from Sylacauga. Now on the left, you see the council chamber at City Hall in Philadelphia. They didn't tear that down, so that marble is still there, and it's all also from Gants Quarry, the white marble that you see. Now, another one of those stories I heard when I was doing the research was that, did I know that the Lincoln Memorial and that the statue of Lincoln were Alabama marble? Well, no, not exactly. The marble for those things came from other quarries around the country, but Alabama does have a presence in the Lincoln Memorial, and it's an interesting one. If you look up at those panels in the left photograph there, above the head of Lincoln, those panels are all slices, literally, of marble from Gants Quarry. The reason they chose Gants Quarry for that is because the marble there can be sawed to as thin as 1/4 of an inch and still retain its strength. When it's 1/4 of an inch, it's translucent. And so what they did was to cut those panels, and then they rubbed them with beeswax to make them even more translucent. And the reason for that was that they wanted to have the natural light shining on the statue of Lincoln. So if you go to the Lincoln Memorial, be sure you look up, because what's above is the Alabama marble. That was done in 1922. 1935, they built the United States Supreme Court building. And if you go in there on the first 2 floors, most of the wainscoting, most of the sashes around the doors and the windows, almost all of that is Alabama Marble Company marble. There's also a double staircase that's done in that inside the United States Supreme Court building. But Moretti-Hara had a presence too. Those in the right-hand picture there, you see the tall pillars that line the corridor that's outside the main chamber where the judges sit when they're hearing cases. All of those were quarried and fashioned from Moretti-Hara marble. The picture you see on the left is several of those pillars being loaded on railroad cars to be taken. Moretti-Hara was different from Alabama Marble Company in that Moretti-Hara would take out the marble, cut it to whatever the specifications were, and then they would send it somewhere else to be polished and finished. So here what you see is these pillars being sent up to Tennessee to be finished before they went on to Washington. St. Jude's, I mentioned a minute ago, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church in Sylacauga. A great deal of the marble inside that church was donated by the 4 owner families of the Alabama Marble Company. What you see here is the altar, which is one complete piece of marble. The steps going up, underneath this carpet, the flooring going all the way back. Anything that's marble in there is the local marble, and it's beautiful. It's worth a visit. Now, I also just wanted to kind of give you a feel for some of the operations. Now, this is from early 1900s up into the early 1960s. You can see here the steam derrick again that would pull the marble up out. These are the chunks before they were processed and cut to specification. This is 1916. These are some of the men who worked in the finishing shop, and talking to people who remember this time, they said, you know, they would be polishing marble. This is Alabama Marble Company. They'd be polishing the marble, and of course that dust is just flying everywhere. So at the end of the day, when they would come out of that finishing shop, they would just be white head to toe. But they had these two big air hoses over to the side, and they'd stand over there outside and hose each other off before they'd go and shower and change into their regular clothes. This is one of the saws. This picture was taken back when it was still steam operated, but later these were converted to electricity. But actually the saws that are used for architectural marble still look pretty much like this. And one of the interesting things, if you look up here at the top, they would look at the orders that they had, and they would cut down through the marble based on the sizes that they needed for their jobs. So those little pieces would be moved depending on what they needed. They ran water and sand down over the marble while it was being cut by the saws. This is Lemon Deason in the blacksmith shop. His only job was to keep those points on the end of the drills sharpened so that they could go in and take the marble out. Some of it was blasted out with dynamite in very careful use for architecture in the early days. This is Charlie Adair operating one of the sanding machines that did the polishing. What they had, and of course this is 1938, so by then they had electricity. There would be a motor at one end of this finishing shop, and then all of these belts would be attached to it, all up and down the finishing machine. And you can see here, Charlie's positioning that so that this belt runs the polisher down on the piece of marble here. So that was how it was done back then. Another interesting story, I don't happen to have a clock in front of me. How am I doing time-wise, Dorothy?
It's we have 10 minutes.
Okay, that's perfect. In 1933, if you've ever been to the Ave Maria Grotto up near Coleman, there was a monk up there named Brother Zettel, who created a grotto that had all kinds of miniatures of famous buildings from all over the world. And people would send him pieces of cut glass, all kinds of things to create those with. This particular one was a grotto for a particular saint. But in 1933, there was a shipment of marble pieces being sent by the Alabama Marble Company to a customer somewhere up north. And it derailed, part of it derailed up near Coleman. And the two cars that spilled out just spilled marble all over the place and damaged it to the point where it could not be used for the order. So the owners of the company called the Abbey, the St. Bernard Abbey, and said, look, there's a whole bunch of marble over there by the railroad tracks. If you want to take some carts and go get it, you're welcome to it. Well, Brother Zettel got very excited about that because he knew what he'd use it for. This is parts of that marble from that train derailment. And if you go up there and walk through that area, it's a walkway along a hillside, you'll see all kinds of places where he used that marble to enhance his grotto. Okay, so early 1900s on up into the 1930s. This marble was used for memorial stones in cemeteries. It was used for architecture. It was used for sculpture. But, and it was used on the outside of a lot of buildings, including buildings in Chicago, San Francisco, all over the country. But with the increasing industrial production in the country, there was a lot more air pollution. And what they began to see was that granite was much more able to withstand industrial pollution in the air than marble. Marble began to deteriorate after a period of time with the pollution. And so gradually in the 1930s, the business aspects of the marble began to go down because there was not as much of a demand for it. Fortunately, the 4 owners of the Alabama Marble Company anticipated this, and they and their sons, who were also part of the company by that point, began looking for other opportunities to use the marble. It kind of makes me cringe when I have to tell this, but this is where they went. They began to manufacture what they called GCC, which is ground calcium carbonate. There wasn't enough demand for the slabs of marble, so they began to do what you see here in this plant, grind it up into little bitty powder to be used in industry. The Georgia Marble Company came in and bought up some of these companies, and it became a very successful, before World War II, a very successful industrial resource. Now, you might not know what GCC is, but I can guarantee you that at some point in any given day, you've come in contact with it. If you've opened up a piece of chewing gum that's wrapped in foil, you know, that little white powder that's all over the gum to keep it from sticking, that's ground calcium carbonate. If you buy a loaf of bread and it says calcium fortified, it has probably marble dust from Sylacauga in your bread. It won't hurt you, but that's what it is. It's also used in the coatings that they make for papers, like in cash registers and copying machines. It's used in paint thinners. It's a huge product today, and it has had a tremendous economic impact on Sylacauga. So what happened from the 30s on up really into to today was that the shift was away from architectural and artistic use, and it became just an industrial product. The 2 main companies that are out there today are Amia and Imerys, and they both operate huge quarries. Imerys is a huge international company based in France. Their largest ground calcium carbonate quarry in the world is Sylacauga. Another mention, bringing time forward, in 1969, the Alabama legislature, I don't know if you know this, but marble is the official state rock of Alabama and has been since 1969. Now, what I loved about writing this book was that it didn't just end with grinding it up for chewing gum and bread and paint thinner. I've already told you about the establishment of the Marble Festival. What began to happen beginning in 2009 was that it came full circle. The industrial use was extremely successful, but because of the Marble Festival, they began to also go back and quarry the marble for sculpture. And it was highly successful. This is the first, Rino Giannini was the first Italian master sculptor who came in 2009 and taught those other sculptors who came to the festival. This piece is in the library. It's called We're All in the Same Boat, and it's a representation of basic unity among all people. It's a beautiful piece. This is Giovanni Balderi, who came in 2010. I think he came back in 2012 and sculpted and taught during the festival. His piece on the right that you see there is called The Mask, and it talks about the fact that we all wear different, it's kind of appropriate today, although I hadn't thought about that until this moment. But he talks about how masks are part of our identity. We wear masks for various reasons. And of course, now we have a new one. This is just a few photographs of people working at the festival over the years. They put up the tents in Bluebell Park, which is across from the ice cream place in Sylacauga. They run power through the storm sewers over to the park so that they can use their tools. And they do incredibly beautiful sculpture. I can't remember your name, but I know you're out there. The person who knows Frank Murphy, he was always one of the sculptors who was there. I also wanted to give you, Craig Brown, as I mentioned, is the resident sculptor for the city of Sylacauga. And I want to show you the first major commissioned piece he did for the city, right from the block of marble. Here it is. Here he is working on it. As I mentioned, he's a native of Vestavia Hills. He graduated from the University of Montevallo and then studied in Pietrasanta in Italy. Taking shape. It's interesting, he was explaining about how careful he had to be right here and over here because the piece is weakened when you cut around a part of it. So you have to be very careful to keep the strength of the marble. Here he is still working on it. And there's the final piece. It's called Sylacauga Emerging, and it's the concept of the city of Sylacauga carving itself out of its major resource, the marble. This is another piece by Craig Brown. If you visit Ivy Green, which is the home of Helen Keller, this is a piece that Craig did for that, showing the moment that Helen Keller first realized that water was the word for what she felt running across her hand at the well. And this is the most recent piece that Craig Brown did with, I've got to check his name, Marcello Giorgi, who was the master sculptor that came in 2019, I believe, to the Marble Festival. It's hard to see the bas-relief in this because it's lit up at night, but one side is a contemporary woman, as if a woman in the moon, done by Craig. And if you go around and look on the other side, it's more of a Greco-Roman traditional piece of a woman in the moon. It's a beautiful piece. It's in the new sculpture garden at the Montgomery Museum. So that basically what I saw was you started out with art, you went to industrial, and now you have the two together. And both Amia and Imerys and other companies in the Sylacauga area heavily support the Marble Festival. So it's kind of a community work. Again, this is the book that came out of that research. And if you want to know more about this story, you're certainly welcome to get a copy of that. And that's my presentation. I hope maybe you have some questions, or perhaps some of you may have memories of your own stories that are connected to this. I'll be glad to listen to anything you want to share.
Who owns the quarry now?
Pardon?
Who owns the quarry now?
Excuse me. Most of Gant's Quarry is owned by the Imerys company. There's a small section of it that's owned by Amia. And then there is another company out in Bessemer now that's owned by the Swindle family. It's called Alabama Marble something or other. Anyway, they have another quarry. They have reopened another old quarry, and they are doing architectural stone. They do countertops, they do, pillars, that kind of thing.
I'm with that company. If y'all have any questions.
Can you give me the proper name of it, Emily?
Yes, we're Alabama Marble Mineral and Mining Company.
That's right. I knew it was 3 M's, but I couldn't remember what they were. So yes, and
AM3 for short.
They're doing a beautiful job. I took a really fun ride down to the bottom of that quarry one day with Jacob Swindle, and got to see the big machines and all of that. So yeah, it's just great to see both the architectural and the industrial working now. So
absolutely.
When is there another festival planned?
Yes, unfortunately, like just about everything else in 2020, it was canceled. But they are hoping to have a festival in April. It's usually the first week of April. How modified that will be, I don't know, but you can go to the website of the Comer Library in Sylacauga, or you can also kind of Google Sylacauga Marble Festival and find the information. They have not totally put it together yet. There is a wonderful video that they made, which should be on that website, that interviews, they did it in place of doing the festival this year, and it interviews Frank Murphy and Craig Brown, Dr. Ted Spears, who is the director of the Comer Foundation, about the festival and the history of the festival. So they're hoping to have it this year, but they have that video they can give out to organizations and schools and so on if they don't.
Thank you.
Are there further questions?
I was just going to say that I bet the sculptor that was in the one that did the emerging from Sylacauga, the man emerging, I wonder if he studied with Gabriel Metz's father, who used to be the professor at Montevallo. He was a sculptor.
Ted Metz.
Yeah.
Probably did. What was his name? Gabriel what?
Metz, M-E-T-Z. His name was Ted Metz.
Oh, Ted. Yes, yes. And that's interesting. Ted did a piece in front of the Hoover City Hall.
Yeah, he's done. He has some in UAB as well. He has them around town.
Under my other hat one year, I did an interview with Ted Metz about that piece when it went up at the Hoover City Hall. But yes, I do know for a fact that Krager did study at least to some extent with him. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I attended the festival, I think about maybe 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, and it was very, very interesting, really enjoyable. Fascinating to watch the sculptors do their work.
I had one neighbor who literally went back 3 times because she went when the festival, the first or second day, and one of the sculptors was working on a piece, and she just had to go back 2 more times and see how it was developing. Did you take any of the quarry tours when you went to the festival?
Yes.
That's also interesting to do.
Yes.
We had hoped to take a group from Temple Bethel actually last spring, but it was canceled because of the COVID. But I hope in the future, maybe we'll be able to do it and see the quarries for ourselves.
Well, if I find out any more information about the plans, Dorothy, I'll make sure that you get them. So
that would be good.
Because
I would like to contact me. I could maybe arrange a tour of our quarry.
That'd be good. That'd be great.
Also seeing some of the sculptures in the library. They have some beautiful pieces, and that's a beautiful library there.
I have often said that I think that's one of the most beautiful, friendly libraries I have ever visited. And
I agree.
That reminds me of something else I wanted to tell you. I have a Facebook page called Cook's Book Nook. And currently on there, we're doing kind of a virtual tour of many of those sculptures you mentioned that are in the library. One of the pieces that's on that Facebook page is about Frank Murphy's Rapunzel, which is a beautiful sculpture of, the image of Rapunzel with her fingers going through her hair. The stories behind many of those sculptures are on that Facebook page. There are also tours of the new Rotary Trail downtown in Birmingham, because Frank's table, which is at the end of that walk, the tabletop is the more unusual pink marble from Sylacauga. And then there are stainless steel sculptures with that. But there are, I think, probably now more than 20 different posts on that site that explain more about the marble. The most recent one, a young woman got in touch with me a couple of weeks ago and said that her grandparents had owned a store out there. It was called Ezekiel's Grocery. And she had seen that there was a photograph of that store in my book, and she wanted to know if she could get a copy of it. Well, when I sent her the copy of the photograph, I put a little piece on Cook's Book Nook about her getting in touch and her memories of that grocery store. And as of yesterday, 1,200 people had read that story. So there are a lot of people out there who remember Gant's Quarry and appreciate those memories. So you're perfectly welcome to visit that. You don't have to friend me or anything to do so. It's just Cook's Book Nook on Facebook.
Well, I would like to thank you so much for sharing your vast knowledge of the quarries in Sylacauga and all the wonderful sculptures that you showed the photographs of. You were just terrific, and we really appreciate your coming to share your knowledge with us today. Thank you
It's
so
been my
much.
pleasure to visit with you, and it's been so fun to be able to see the faces. I don't always get to do that, so that's been fun. Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. It was so interesting, Ruth.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Ruth? Ruth,
Yes.
what makes Alabama marble so wonderful compared to marble that might be in other places?
That's a good question. It has to do, it has to do with the, and I'm no geologist, but it has to do with the crystal structure of the marble. Because of the type of structure it has more strength than many marbles do. And it also is a purer white color. We often call it sugar white. So it's more appealing for those two reasons.
Okay.
It's expensive to quarry though, because as I mentioned, you have to go down to get to it, and you don't want to dynamite it, too much, because obviously that would damage the structure. So it's often more expensive to quarry than other types of marble, but once you get it out, it has a strength and a color that are very appealing.
Interesting. One afternoon, I watched a piece on Alabama Public Television about the Sylacauga marble and the mining, and they showed the machinery and how they actually slice it. It was totally fascinating.
It is, yeah. I've forgotten his name, the guy that does that Discover Alabama show.
Oh, it was a wonderful piece. It was my introduction. Ruth, thank you for your very interesting comments today and for your knowledge.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll look for your books at the temple. You're going to send them to Dorothy, or how
Yes.
do I get those?
Dorothy, can they let you know they're ordering? Okay.
Fine.
Pardon?
They can either do it through me or through you directly if you want me to share your email address.
That's fine. If you want to email me and tell me what you want, I'll package them up and I'll put a little envelope with it for your check and deliver them to Dorothy or to the temple or whatever you want me to do. So
Okay, so I'll just put out.
Be fine.
Barbara, maybe you'll put out the Ruth's email. I'll send it to you, and you can put a note to this effect.
Okay.
Yeah, that would
I
be
need it for a gift for my brother. He lives in Talladega County. We were growing up.
Are you finished now growing up?
No.
I never finished growing up.
No.
The only problem is the direction changes. Instead of going north, we're going east and west.
Oh, no.
That's the big problem.
oh, that's good.
And I'm so glad you could join us, Gail. Oh, she's muted. She doesn't hear. Well,
thank you, Dorothy. For all those other people watching, I grew up in Sylacauga. And I did not know this, but one year, I guess 2009, when I was at the festival, this must be your book.
That's right. Yeah, that was the original brochure.
I bought some pieces over time, and I bought one in memory of my parents, I think about, 5 or 10 years ago. And I met the sculptor, and it was a heart. It's thick, very thick, but maybe as big as your TV computer screen. And there's a pink vein in it.
Oh.
That was so unusual when they cut that white heart thick, that there was this pink vein running through. It's in the library unless somebody has taken it. And I hope
that pink marble is unusual. If you want to see a really beautiful piece of that, and actually, I don't know where Emily is here, but it's Jacob Swindle who provided it. The table in that at the end of the Rotary Trail, that sculpture is a really interesting piece. The table is all that pink and gray striated marble, and it's beautiful. But there are also, it's like the sculptor determined that a bee can only fly if it can attach its smaller wing to the larger one. In other words, they're separated when they're landed, but then they have to put, it's hard for me to explain, but anyway, the middle of the table and the backs of the chairs around it are all done as these bees, and it's just an incredible contemporary sculpture. So if you want to take a pretty walk on a pretty day, go park somewhere on South Side and walk that rotary trail. It's only about a half a mile, but it's beautiful.
And Dorothy, we can do that, you know, when we can live again.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
We have we call it Alabama Rose, the pink. We recently, it has a lot of green in it too, so there'll be a green vein surrounded by pink. And we recently pulled out a block out of a quarry that's so pink it's purple. So we found a really gorgeous piece that we recently, it's so colorful.
What are you going to use it for? Are you going to?
So I think if someone wants to buy it, we were calling it Stella Viola, Purple Star, because of the color of it. It's really gorgeous. So I mean, if anybody wants it, I'm sure we're gonna take it to the factory and cut it in the slab, and it's gonna be gorgeous.
We have purchased at Temple Bethel benches from Jacob Swindle for our cemetery.
Oh yeah.
And he took Bob Greenberg and me on a tour of the new plant that they built out in Bessemer, which is something else to see, with huge slabs of marble. And I know that Jacob travels all over to trade shows.
Yeah.
So our marble is probably going everywhere now. Is that right, Emily?
Yes. So I'm the director of marketing with AM3. I started in late August. And so a part of what we're doing right now is we're making a big push to get our marble nationwide. So we want designers and architects to know about it across the nation, because what I've come up with, and I think it's true, is that Alabama marble, it has the quality of Italian marble, but Italian marble is so popular and famous for what it is. But Alabama marble is that same quality, but it's right here. So you can get it in Alabama, and you don't need to buy the super expensive Italian. You can get Alabama marble here, and it's gorgeous and unique. And we're expanding the quarry and our operations, and it's a gorgeous resource.
That's great.
Do you have some of the purple at your plant in Bessemer?
I don't know. On our Facebook page is AM3 Stone. We have a let's see, we have a photo of it. I can show it to y'all if you would like, because it was so very beautiful. And it is, I gotta scroll. Okay.
Is the British lady I interviewed still working with you?
I do not think
Claire, I think was her name.
We do not have anyone named Claire right now. Okay, here we go. So if y'all wanted to see, there it is.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Wait, I have to move my screen.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is beautiful. Wow.
So it's got this deep greens and then the purple.
Oh, there.
Lovely. Beautiful.
It is, yeah.
Wow.
Dorothy, thank you for letting me join your group.
Well,
today.
I'm delighted that you could come today. It's good to see you.
I just heard about this from a friend, so here I was. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
See you
Thanks for
all
coming.
soon. Thank you. Thank
And
you.
I'm delighted you shared your story about that special sculpture in honor of your parents. That was beautiful.
Yes.
One other quick little thing, our driveway when we were growing up were little marble rocks, little rocks, like you couldn't use them, you know, it was like the leftover. We did not appreciate it, I can tell you. Really.
Hard on bare feet.
Now I appreciate it, but then I didn't appreciate it. That was before driveways were paved or, you know, blacktopped or whatever. The
Right.
rocks were marble.
That
Little
was, gosh, tough on the feet.
Yeah, really, really. But you know, everybody went barefoot. We just kept running over it anyway back then. Okay, thank you all.
You're welcome. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.